They were known as Skitrans,
Goonie birds, the workhorse transport planes of the Air Transport Command.
built to haul cargo, mail, and paratroopers, never to bomb enemy positions,
never to fight the enemy, never to be aces.
But in the autumn of 1944, over the plains of northern Italy, one C-47 Skitran crew would defy the impossible. They would turn their unarmed transport plane into a bomber. They would fly into the face of German flak. And they would come back with a medal that no cargo plane pilot ever thought possible, the first and only transport aces of World War II.
This is the story of the 88th Troop Carrier Squadron, of a desperate mission over the Per Valley.
And of 5 men who showed that on the right day, with the right determination, even a Goonie bird could become a weapon of war. To understand how cargo pilots became bomber aces, we must first understand where they came from. The 88th Troop Carrier Squadron traced its lineage to June 1943, activated under I Troop Carrier Command at Bear Field, Indiana. Their aircraft was the Douglas C-47 Skitran, a military version of the DC-3 airliner.
It carried no armor,
no self-sealing fuel tanks, no bombing equipment whatsoever. Its top speed of 230 miles per hour made it a sitting duck for German fighters. Its maximum altitude of 24,000 feet meant it flew well within range of enemy flak. However, by February 1944, the 88th had already crossed the Atlantic, assigned to RAF Longar in England, as part of the 9 Troop Carrier Command. Their mission: to prepare for the largest amphibious assault in history. On the night of June 5, 1944, they took off for France. Their mission: to deliver paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division's 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment. Through radio blackout, overloaded planes, low cloud cover, and unmarked drop zones, they parachuted their troops into the darkness above Normandy. For their service on D-Day and in the days that followed, the 438th Troop Carrier Group, including the 88th Squadron, was awarded the Distinguished Unit Citation. But their war was far from over. However, by July 1944, the Allied advance in Italy had reached a standstill. The Germans had constructed the Gothic Line, a formidable defensive line that stretched across the Italian peninsula from Pisa to Rimini. To revive their momentum, the Allied commanders chose Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France. And they needed transport planes to make it happen. On July 20, 1944, the 88th Troop Carrier Squadron set out for an unexpected place, Canino Airfield in Italy. They left the green pastures of England behind for the dust and the scorching heat of the Italian summer. They had no clue that Italy would make them legends. Canino Airfield was some 60 miles northwest of Rome. It was a far cry from the well-run airfields of England. Dust filled the radial engines of the C-47s. The ground crews worked day and night in temperatures above 100 degrees. But the show must go on. On August 15, 1944, the 88th dropped paratroops over southern France in support of Operation Dragoon. They towed gliders full of reinforcements and equipment. They flew supply missions to the advancing Allied columns. And when the operation ended, most of the squadron returned to England to gear up for the next airborne assault.
But not all of them.
A small contingent remained behind in Italy. Operating under the 12 Troop Carrier Command, these crews found themselves with no particular mission. The large airborne operations had shifted north. The front lines had settled along the Gothic Line. And the C-47s stood parked on dusty airfields. Then someone asked a question that would change everything. What if we used the transports to drop bombs? It wasn't a new idea. As early as 1942, desperate Allied forces in the Pacific had rigged cargo planes to drop homemade explosives. In Burma, C-47s had kicked 500-pound bombs out side doors to harass Japanese supply lines. But in the European theater, with its thick concentrations of flak and radar-directed defenses, the idea was plain crazy. Still, the detachment's commanding officer got his orders. The 57th Bomb Wing required more punch to attack German supply lines in the Per Valley. The 88th's C-47s would be called upon to serve as bombers.
There was one problem.
The C-47 had no bomb sight,
no bomb bay, no racks,
no release mechanisms. The answer was pure improvisation. The ground crew took out the paratroop seats from the cabin. They installed roller conveyors along the floor, the same kind used to kick supply bundles out. Then they loaded 500-pound general-purpose bombs on wooden pallets. When the pilot gave the signal, the crew would kick the pallets out the side door. Gravity would take care of the rest. It was crude. It was dangerous. And it required nerves of steel. On September 8, 1944, 5 C-47s of the 88th Troop Carrier Squadron lifted off from Canino Airfield. Their target, German supply depots near Bologna. Each aircraft carried 4 500-pound bombs. Each crew understood that they were flying unarmed into one of the most heavily defended airspace in Europe.
Lieutenant Colonel Charles Young led the formation.
At 35, He was an old man by pilot standards, a veteran of the pre-war Air Corps who had flown cargo runs over the hump in the China-Burma-India theater. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Robert Benson, was just 23, a farm boy from Iowa who had never seen combat until Normandy. In the cargo hold, Crew Chief Technical Sergeant Michael Korba and Radio Operator Staff Sergeant James Dietz prepared the first bomb. They removed the safety pins, they checked the roller conveyor, and they waited for the green light. The formation climbed to 8,000 feet, well below the altitude of heavy bombers, but high enough to clear the Apennine Mountains.
Ahead lay the Per Valley, obscured by haze and industrial smoke.
Below, German flak batteries tracked their approach.
Flak at 11 o'clock low, Benson called out.
Black puffs appeared below them, 88mm shells bursting at 7,000 feet. The Germans had spotted them, but the gunners seemed confused.
These wären TB-17s. They weren't even A-20s.
They were transports, slow, unarmed, and seemingly defenseless. Young held his course.
The bombs wären T-armed yet.
Korba and Dietz needed time. 30 seconds to IP, Young announced. The initial point, the final turn toward the target.
More flak.
Closer now. Shrapnel pinged against the fuselage. Dietz later described the sound as hail on a tin roof, except this hail could kill.
Bombs armed, Korba shouted over the intercom.
Young banked the C-47 onto the bomb run.
No Norden bomb site. No bombardier.
Just a mark on the windscreen that Young had scratched with a screwdriver, his best estimate of where the bombs would fall.
Green light.
Korba and Dietz heaved the first pallet toward the door. It caught on the roller, hesitated for a terrible second, then slid out into the slipstream. They watched it tumble end over end toward the smoke-shrouded target below. Then they went to work on the second bomb. 2,000 feet below, the first bomb struck near a German ammunition dump.
The explosion sent a column of fire and debris 500 feet into the air.
The other C-47s in the formation released their loads. For a moment, the sky above Bologna looked like the set of a disaster film. 5 slow, vulnerable transports weaving through flak while 500-pound bombs rained down on German positions. Then the fighters came. 2 Messerschmitt Bf-109s, probably from Jagdgeschwader 77, streaked through the formation. They had been vectored onto the bombers by ground control, only to discover that their targets were unarmed transports. What happened next would become legend. The first Bf-109 lined up on the lead C-47, Young's aircraft. 20mm cannons flashed from its wings. Tracer rounds walked toward the transport. Benson watched them coming, frozen in place, unable to do anything but brace for impact. But Young wasn't frozen. He hauled back on the control yoke, standing the C-47 on its tail. The Messerschmitt's guns passed beneath them. The German pilot, committed to his run, couldn't adjust in time. He flashed past so close that Benson could see the pilot's face, Young surprised, and suddenly very vulnerable. Because now the German was directly in front of the number 2 C-47.
Lieutenant James Morrison piloted the second aircraft.
When the Bf-109 passed in front of him, he had less than 2 seconds to react. His C-47 carried no guns, no defenses whatsoever. But it carried 4 crewmen who understood that if they didn't act, they would die.
Push everything, Morrison shouted.
Sergeant Frank Dillio didn't hesitate. He and another crewman grabbed a 500-pound bomb, still armed, still dangerous, and hurled it toward the open door. Not on the roller conveyor.
Not carefully aimed, just pushed.
The bomb tumbled out of the C-47 at 7,500 feet. The German pilot never saw it. He was still recovering from his pass, climbing to re-engage the formation.
The bomb struck his Messerschmitt just behind the cockpit. The aircraft disintegrated in mid-air.
In the C-47, the crew watched in stunned silence. They had just destroyed a German fighter with a bomb.
Not a gun. Not a missile. A bomb. Dropped by hand. From a cargo plane. Did we just? Dillio started. Pull the next bomb. Morrison shouted. We've got company. The second Bf-109 had witnessed his wingman's destruction. He broke off his attack immediately, climbing for altitude and disappearing into the clouds. He wasn't coming back. Not against opponents who threw bombs at fighters. But the flak hadn't stopped. If anything, it intensified. The Germans on the ground had witnessed the impossible, a cargo plane shooting down a fighter, and they responded with every gun they had. Young's aircraft took hits. Shrapnel tore through the fuselage, missing Korba by inches.
The hydraulic system began losing pressure. One engine started running rough. A piece of flak had damaged an oil line. But they were past the target now, heading for the coast, heading for home. They counted heads. All present. All alive. Against all odds, 5 C-47s were returning from a bombing mission without a single casualty. But they didn't know yet what they had accomplished. They didn't know that this mission would rewrite the definition of ace. Back at Canino Airfield, the crews gathered for debriefing. Intelligence officers expected the usual report: bombs dropped on coordinates, results unobserved, flak moderate to heavy. What they got instead was a story that seemed too fantastic to believe. "We dropped our bombs as ordered," Morrison reported.
"Then we shut down a Messerschmitt."
The intelligence officer looked up from his clipboard.
"You what?" "We threw a bomb at him. Hit him square. He went down." Word spread through the detachment.
By evening, everyone at Canino had heard the story. Most dismissed it as combat exaggeration, the kind of tale that grows in the telling. But the next morning, reconnaissance photos arrived from the Bologna area. They confirmed multiple bomb strikes on the ammunition dump. And buried in the report was a note from Italian partisans: a German fighter had crashed near the target area at approximately the same time as the raid.
The 57th Bomb Wing wanted details.
They sent a liaison officer to interview the crews personally. What they learned forced them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about transport aircraft. Lieutenant Morrison's crew, Dillio, plus Sergeants Thomas Palmatier and Robert Morgan, had indeed dropped a bomb on a German fighter. The bomb's contact fuse had detonated on impact with the aircraft. The Messerschmitt had gone down with no chance of recovery. But that wasn't all. Lieutenant Young's crew, Benson, Korba, and Dietz, had bombed the ammunition dump with such accuracy that subsequent reconnaissance showed secondary explosions continuing for hours. They had destroyed more enemy supplies than some dedicated bomber squadrons. And then there was the question of classification. In World War II, the term ace had a specific meaning. It applied to fighter pilots who had shot down 5 or more enemy aircraft.
Bomber crews weren't aces.
Transport crews definitely weren't aces. But what did you call a crew that destroyed an ammunition dump and shot down a fighter, all in the same mission? The 57th Bomb Wing's operations officer, Colonel Harvey Dyer, made a decision. He forwarded the recommendation with a simple note: if these men aren't aces, we need a new word for what they are. The 88th Troop Carrier Squadron's detachment had done more than complete a mission. They had redefined what was possible. They had proven that courage and improvisation could overcome any technological disadvantage. And they had earned a place in aviation history. The September 8 mission to Bologna marked the first, but not the last, time C-47s operated as bombers over Italy. The 88th's detachment flew additional missions through September and October 1944, targeting German supply lines, troop concentrations, and communication centers. Each mission carried the same risks: unarmed aircraft, improvised bomb loads, and deadly flak. But the crews never lost another aircraft. By November, the detachment had rejoined the main squadron in England, preparing for Operation Varsity, the airborne crossing of the Rhine. On March 24, 1945, they dropped paratroops of the 17th Airborne Division near Wesel, Germany. It was their last combat mission of the war. The 88th Troop Carrier Squadron received no special designation for their bombing missions. The term transport ace never became official. But the men who flew those missions knew what they had done. And the German troops who witnessed their attacks never forgot the sight of slow, vulnerable C-47s pressing home their bomb runs through curtains of flak. Technical Sergeant Michael Korba received the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions on September 8. Lieutenant James Morrison received the Silver Star, one of the few transport pilots ever awarded that honor for aerial combat. Sergeant Frank Dillio received the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. But perhaps the greatest recognition came from the men they served alongside. When the 88th returned to the United States in August 1945, preparing for demobilization, they left behind a legacy that would outlast any medal or citation. They had proven that the line between transport and combat aircraft was never as fixed as doctrine suggested. They had shown that courage mattered more than equipment. And they had demonstrated that in the right hands, even a Goonie bird could become a weapon of war. Today, the C-47 Skitran is remembered as one of history's greatest transport aircraft. It carried paratroopers into Normandy.
It flew the hump over the Himalayas.
It sustained armies across every theater of World War II. But for a few weeks in the autumn of 1944, over the dusty plains of northern Italy, 5 C-47s became something else. They became bombers. They became fighters. They became legends. The men of the 88th Troop Carrier Squadron didn't set out to make history. They set out to do their jobs, to support the infantry, to harass the enemy, to bring their crews home. In doing so, they became the unlikeliest aces of World War II. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.